It started as a favor, just a friend crashing at my place for a few nights. I never thought one shared bed could test everything I thought I knew about love. The night it began, the rain hadn't stopped for hours, the kind that fills every corner of the city with quiet. Liam had left early that morning for a work trip to Chicago, leaving the apartment a little too still. I tried to focus on work, on the sound of the storm, but the silence had weight to it. When my phone buzzed and Ryan's name appeared, it felt like a small spark in the dark. Ryan and I hadn't seen each other properly in years. We'd been college roommates, the kind of friends who stayed up late talking about everything and nothing. He said he had just moved to Seattle and needed a place to stay for a few nights until he found an apartment. I didn't even hesitate. I told him to come over. By the time he arrived, soaked from the rain, his familiar grin lit up the doorway. "You haven't changed a bit," he said, shaking off his jacket. I laughed and handed him a towel, pretending not to notice how my chest felt lighter seeing him again. We talked for hours that first night. He told me about his job, his breakup, the mess of starting over. I told him about Liam's long work trips, how we barely saw each other anymore. There was no bitterness in my voice, just tiredness. Ryan listened the way he always had, fully, with that quiet focus that made you feel understood. At one point, he reached across the table to pat my hand and said, "You've always been too good at waiting for people to notice you." His words landed softly but stayed with me. When I showed him the apartment, I realized the couch was still broken from when our friends had visited months ago. I joked about it, but Ryan just smiled. "It's fine," he said. "We've shared tighter spaces before, remember freshman year?" He wasn't wrong. Back then, sharing a cramped dorm bed had felt normal. But now, standing there years later, the idea made my stomach twist. I nodded anyway, told myself it was harmless. We settled into bed a little past midnight. The rain had softened into a drizzle, tapping gently against the window. I stayed on my side, careful not to move too much, pretending to scroll through my phone. Ryan sighed beside me. "Thanks again for letting me stay," he murmured. "I know it's weird." "It's not weird," I lied. "Still," he said, his voice lower now, "it's good to be around someone who remembers who I was before everything got complicated." I looked at him in the faint light spilling from the street lamp outside. His eyes were closed, but there was something about his expression that made me feel like he wasn't really asleep, like he was holding on to a memory too. I thought about Liam, about how our calls had become shorter, our silences longer. He always said he missed me but never changed his schedule. I tried to remind myself that love was about patience, not proximity. But lying there next to Ryan, I realized how much I missed being seen, being understood without having to explain. It wasn't about romance, not yet. It was about comfort, about being reminded that someone still noticed the small things. I turned slightly toward him, careful not to make a sound. His breathing was slow, steady, peaceful. A part of me wanted to reach out, just to rest my hand on his arm, the way friends do when they've said everything that needs saying. But I didn't. I kept still, memorizing the moment instead. The sound of the rain, the faint smell of his shampoo, the warmth radiating between us. All of it felt heavier than it should have. When I finally closed my eyes, I expected sleep to come easily. It didn't. My mind replayed old moments. Nights in the dorm when we'd talk until sunrise, the way he'd fall asleep mid-sentence, the way I'd pretend not to notice. Back then, it had been simple friendship. Now I wasn't sure what it was. The line had blurred without either of us meaning it to. Just before dawn, I woke to the faint sound of him shifting beside me. His shoulder brushed mine, soft and unintentional. I froze, waiting. He didn't move again. The city outside was still, the rain just a whisper. I stared at the ceiling, listening to his breathing, and told myself it was nothing, that it had to be nothing. But somewhere deep down, I knew that something had already changed. By the time morning came, the world looked the same. Coffee brewed, the rain picked up again, and Ryan smiled sleepily when he walked into the kitchen. "You make the same brand of coffee we had back then," he said with a grin. "Guess some things never change." I smiled back, pretending not to feel the strange warmth rising in my chest. I didn't know what it meant or where it would lead, but I knew, as I handed him his mug and our fingers brushed briefly, that the quiet between us had shifted, no longer empty, but full of something unspoken. And in that silence, I felt both comforted and afraid. The next night, I realized it wasn't just the bed we were sharing. It was something deeper, something I wasn't ready to name. The rain outside had grown heavier, washing against the windows like it was trying to drown out everything I didn't want to feel. Ryan had cooked dinner, pasta, the kind we used to make in college when money was tight. We laughed about it, and for a while, everything felt simple again. But underneath that laughter was an ache I couldn't ignore. He talked about his breakup again, about how it ended without warning. I just came home one day and he was gone, Ryan said quietly, pushing his food around the plate. No explanation, just a note. I wanted to say something comforting, but all I could manage was, "You didn't deserve that." He looked up at me, and for a second, the air between us thickened. "Neither did you," he said softly. It took me a moment to understand what he meant. Maybe he'd seen it. The distance between Liam and me, the fatigue in my voice when I mentioned him. I wanted to defend Liam, to defend us, but no words came. Instead, I just looked at Ryan, and for the first time, I saw how tired he looked too. The kind of tired that comes from missing something you can't name. After dinner, we cleaned up together, bumping shoulders as we worked. It felt natural, like muscle memory. When I reached for the dish soap, his hand brushed mine. It was nothing, just a small touch, but it left a spark I couldn't shake. He noticed it too. I saw it in the way his breath caught, in how his eyes lingered for a second too long. He smiled, a little awkwardly, and turned back to the sink. We didn't talk about it, but the silence said more than words ever could. Later that night, we sat on the couch watching an old movie. The lights were dim, the rain relentless. Ryan stretched his arm along the back of the couch, close but not touching me. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, the small gravity that pulled my thoughts closer. He laughed at a line from the movie, and I found myself watching his profile instead of the screen, the curve of his jaw, the faint shadow of stubble, the softness in his smile. When he turned to look at me, I looked away, pretending to be focused on the movie. When we finally went to bed, the room felt heavier than the night before. The space between us seemed smaller, the air thicker. I lay facing the wall, trying to slow my breathing, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. I could hear him shift behind me, the faint rustle of sheets. Then a pause. Then his voice low and careful. "Ethan, are you awake?" I didn't answer right away. "Yeah," I whispered finally. "Thanks again. For letting me stay. I know I've been a lot." "You haven't," I said, still not turning around. "You've just been human." There was a silence, the kind that carries meaning. Then I felt it. His hand, slow and uncertain, brushing near mine. Not grabbing, not holding, just resting close enough for me to feel its warmth. My breath hitched. Every part of me screamed to move away, but I couldn't. I didn't want to. His fingers grazed mine again, and this time I didn't pull back. For a moment, everything around us disappeared. The rain, the distance, the guilt. There was just that small, fragile touch that felt like both a question and an answer. Then he pulled back suddenly, as if realizing what he'd done. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I turned slightly, my voice barely audible. "It's okay." But it wasn't. It wasn't okay because I felt something I wasn't supposed to. And even though nothing more happened, I knew that something had shifted between us. Something neither of us could undo. We lay there, both pretending to sleep. I could hear his breathing steady again, but I knew he wasn't asleep either. My mind replayed the touch again and again, each time burning a little deeper. I thought about Liam, about the last time we'd fallen asleep together, about how long it had been since I'd felt warmth that real. I hated myself for thinking it, for comparing. But the truth was impossible to ignore. When morning came, the air felt different. Ryan greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Coffee?" he asked, his tone light, pretending nothing had happened. I nodded, pretending too. But our movements felt rehearsed, our laughter slightly delayed. Every glance lingered a second too long. Every word carried a hidden weight. We spent the morning in half conversations, both aware of the space between us but too afraid to cross it again. The rain outside had stopped, but the heaviness inside hadn't. At one point, Ryan looked at me across the table and smiled softly, as if to say, We'll just forget. But neither of us believed that. The memory of his hand still lingered between us. Not a scar, not a wound, but a reminder of something forbidden and tender all at once. That day, I caught my reflection in the window, eyes tired, expression distant, and I realized something I didn't want to admit. Sometimes infidelity doesn't start with lies or betrayal. Sometimes it starts with a moment that feels too real to ignore. A moment you tell yourself means nothing, even when it means everything. ChatGPT. I thought I could forget that night, but you can't unfeel something that felt that real. For days after, I told myself it was a misunderstanding. A moment of weakness. Nothing more. Ryan didn't bring it up again, and neither did I. We moved around each other like two people afraid of making noise in a room full of fragile things. I tried to convince myself that the air hadn't changed, that we could go back to being just friends. But every glance, every quiet pause, reminded me that we'd already crossed an invisible line. A few days later, Liam called. His voice came through the phone, bright and distracted. He talked about meetings, about the cold in Chicago, about how busy everything was. He didn't ask how I'd been, not really. When I said I missed him, there was a delay before he answered, a delay that said more than words. "I'll be back soon," he said finally. "We'll make up for lost time." But when the call ended, the apartment felt emptier than before. Ryan was sitting on the couch when I came out of the bedroom. He looked up and gave me a faint smile. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said automatically, even though the truth was tangled somewhere inside me. He nodded, but his eyes searched mine like he didn't believe me. "You don't have to pretend with me, you know," he said quietly. "You never did." Something in his tone broke the dam I'd been holding back. "I don't even know what I'm pretending anymore," I admitted. "I love Liam, but lately it feels like I'm the only one still trying." Ryan didn't say anything for a long time. Then he whispered, "Maybe you just want to feel like someone still sees you." That hit harder than I expected. I looked away, my throat tightening. "You shouldn't have said that." "I know," he said. "But it's true, isn't it?" The silence that followed was heavy, thick with things neither of us wanted to face. Finally, Ryan stood up and walked to the window. The rain had started again, gentle this time, streaking the glass like slow tears. "Maybe I should go," he said quietly. "Before we make this harder." I wanted to tell him not to ask him to stay just one more night. But I knew he was right. Still, the words slipped out before I could stop them. "You didn't ruin anything, Ryan." He turned to look at me, his eyes tired but soft. "Maybe not, but I think I reminded you of something you'd forgotten." He started packing his things the next morning. I helped without saying much, folding his clothes, avoiding his gaze. When everything was ready, we stood at the doorway for a long time, unsure how to end something that never officially began. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that tries to hide how much it hurts. "You'll be okay," he said. "I know," I replied. "You too." He hesitated before stepping forward, pulling me into a brief hug. It wasn't passionate or desperate, just warm, human, real. I felt the weight of every unspoken word in that moment, every emotion we had no right to feel. When he finally let go, I wanted to reach out again, but I didn't. He walked out into the rain, and I stood at the doorway long after he disappeared down the street. That night, the apartment felt impossibly quiet. The bed felt too big, too cold. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about the sound of his laugh, the way his hand had brushed mine, the look in his eyes when he said goodbye. The memories replayed like a song stuck on repeat, beautiful, painful, impossible to turn off. My phone buzzed around midnight. It was a message from Liam. "Miss you. Can't wait to be home." I stared at the words for a long time before replying, "Miss you too." It was true, I did miss him, but in a different way now, a quieter way. Something inside me had shifted, and I knew things wouldn't feel the same when he returned. As the rain eased outside, I sat up and looked at the empty side of the bed where Ryan had slept. The pillow still held a faint trace of his scent. I reached out and rested my hand there for a moment, then pulled it back, ashamed of how much comfort it gave me. I whispered to the dark, "Sometimes it's not what you do that changes everything. It's what you almost do. In that moment, I understood what infidelity really meant. It wasn't just betrayal in the physical sense. It was emotional distance, the quiet craving for connection that grows when love starts to fade. It was a confession spoken without words, a truth you try to bury under loyalty. I hadn't cheated, not really. But a part of my heart had stepped outside the lines, and I couldn't take it back. When Liam came home days later, he hugged me like always, but I felt different inside, heavier, more aware. He asked how things had been, and I told him they were fine. But as he unpacked, I found myself watching him, noticing the distance I had ignored for so long. Maybe Ryan hadn't broken anything between us. Maybe he had just shown me the cracks that were already there. That night, lying beside Liam, I closed my eyes and listened to his breathing. It was steady, familiar, safe. But somewhere in the quiet, I still heard the echo of another night, the sound of rain, the warmth of another presence, the reminder that love is fragile and sometimes the smallest touch can change everything.